Hi, dear friends. While preparing this MEDcast, I realized we are too close to the edge. You might think, what edge? The edge of what is known and unknown in science. We all think that over so many years of existence, science has advanced significantly, but we have more questions yet to answer than questions we have already answered. With the topics I share with you, topics for those that think and read, we are very close to that which is yet unanswered. The things we do not yet know, beyond the wall. The topic I will discuss today is autoimmunity. All medical disciplines will tell you that we do not know where autoimmune diseases come from, not to mention how to treat them, or simply, there is no permanent and certain treatment. Why? Keep watching and see. If you imagine you're playing chess or backgammon against an opponent you cannot see, they are completely in the dark. You don't even notice their hands. Your opponent plays well, but you continue the game, which gradually becomes unfair. They begin prevailing over you, or vice versa, with different success. At one point, the lights go on, and you see that your opponent is, in fact, you. This is autoimmunity, and this is where we begin. This is the big challenge facing biology, medicine, and science in general. I have decided to speak about autoimmunity because it is both an enigma and a paradox, maybe even a teacher, because it gives us a line of thought for many things, while giving us a chance to see that sometimes not everything is perfect in our body. In this podcast, and maybe the next one or two, I will tell you more and unite it in a topic called the brain. What links the three topics is that everything begins and ends with the brain. It commands and conducts this whole process. Back to immunity. What is immunity? Usually, the simplest questions with the most complicated answers are known by all. But there is no single universal answer. Some might say this is the body's defense system. Others might say this is the police, the army in the body. They enforce order. Those that suffer from immunity might say it is a natural killer. And at the same time, all who express an opinion on immunity would be right. Because in certain situations, the brain commands immunity to enforce order, attack, relax, or fight with intruders that come from somewhere else. So, we have an army, governed by one general that oversees everything happening in their territory. Sound familiar? Indeed, it is very similar to Empire strategic games, for example. As a matter of fact, The truth is that what our brains create as a public organisation is copied by what they know from the internal organisation in its own organs. Back to immunity. All adverts you watch on TV, without explaining why, constantly proclaim how important it is to have strong immunity. I might have mentioned this in previous MEDcasts. But strong immunity is actually also the reason for many fatal situations. I have said numerous times that during the COVID pandemic, it was strong immunity that killed people, not the COVID infection itself. So, strong immunity is related to difficulty falling ill, but with frequent allergies. Most people with strong immunity do not get cancers, but not all. However, they develop autoimmune diseases such as arthritis, lupus, and others. Girls with very strong immunity will have an early onset of menopause. They will also experience more miscarriages and will generally have greater difficulty getting pregnant. Let's see the other extreme. Weak immunity is related to more frequent illnesses. The army is simply weaker, and it's easier for different agents to get in. The probability of cancer will be higher among these people, but girls will get pregnant more easily, and menopause will be delayed. Note that they will also experience miscarriages, but for genetic reasons. Briefly put, it's not good to have either strong or weak immunity. It should be balanced. Your brain is what is responsible for keeping this balance. You might ask, can we affect it with our conscience? I would immediately respond, no. It welcomes all the information it receives, processes it, and guides your immune cells in different directions, with different tasks, and every operation they perform, they report back to the brain. This is the brain's game of chess, which it plays every day in your body. I have decided to speak to you about autoimmunity, but before that, I would like to introduce you briefly to immune cells, without getting into a full lecture on immunology. There are two main types of immune cells, the so-called B and T lymphocytes. T lymphocytes are like true tanks. They go to train in a gland called the thymus, and when there is an agent, they go and destroy them in different ways. B lymphocytes are usually the ones that come from the bone marrow. This is also the origin of their abbreviation, T from thymus and B from bone marrow. So, B cells are the ones that don't bother following the agent, catching up and destroying them. They are more like long-range weapons. The moment they notice an agent, they turn into a cannon that starts shooting out protein molecules that we call antibodies. These are the two main types of cells that protect your body. What is autoimmunity? Autoimmunity is when this immune system starts attacking its own body. How? Every cell in your body has a protein passport called MHC1. When the immune cells circulate among them, each one is obliged to present its ID card and show with this passport that it belongs to this body. They do not accept any excuses that they don't have their passport with them. When this passport is present, they move on to the next one. When it is absent, they figure that this is an external agent and the alarm is immediately triggered. Other officers flock in and destroy this agent. You might think, so far so good, a wonderful defense mechanism, which in the end protects the body from disease-bearing bacteria or viruses making their way in or infecting other cells with viruses. When the passport is not presented, they destroy this cell. B lymphocytes also start producing antibodies that go on a search for these viruses or bacteria, and the protein molecules stick to the viruses or bacteria. All of this ends quickly when alerts are received that the agent has been removed. Then another group of T lymphocytes comes into play. We call them regulatory T cells, which are the peacekeeper police officers. They go and say, "Enough fighting, everything is okay, you can stop now." This is the principle of an immune reaction. This reaction could be aimed both at an external agent, bacteria or virus-infected cell, or cancer cells, cells with mutations, because when they mutate, they change their passport. In this case, they are usually destroyed by T lymphocytes. You might ask, okay then, how do cancer cells and cancer appear? I promise I will share more on this in a separate MEDcast, because it is an interesting and lengthy topic. Plus, just recently, new articles were published on the topic that will be of interest. Now, back to autoimmunity. How do these police officers, so well trained to recognize what is their own from what is external, suddenly start attacking what is their own? Where is the bug in the whole system? Let me first tell you about the training of B and T lymphocytes. When they are created in the bone marrow, they are disoriented, or, as immunologists like to call them, naive cells. They recognize nothing. So, they go through their first training on location, where they are born. They are taught to recognize the passports of the body's cells. That is, to know the protein molecule that every cell bears. Note something fantastic. So interesting, and still today, immunologists can't explain. Those youths among them that strongly attach to the passport of the body's cells are destroyed, and only the ones that partially attach to this passport are allowed to proceed to further training. In further training, these cells, accompanied by severe teachers and carefully observed by regulatory T cells not to cause any mayhem, make their way towards the second stage of school. Where is that? In the intestines, the skin, our digestive system. You might ask why? Because all kinds of bacteria and viruses come in through the skin and digestive system. There is a constant flow that looks like the pedestrian crossings at major boulevards in big cities. All sorts of vermin pass through there. What young lymphocytes are trained about there is to tell not only which belongs to us, but also to recognize the bacteria in our digestive system that do good and that should not be attacked. They create the so-called tolerance. Something that is a phenomenon in immunology is how they tell which bacteria are good for us and which are bad. And how do they know this? For the time being, immunologists cannot answer this question. We have reached the moment where these cells are trained. They are now told to get to it and go, observing the order and waiting for the signal from the big boss on where to aim. An infection happens. A cell that is a universal fighter comes with, say, the bacteria. It's called a macrophage. It eats the bacteria, checks the proteins, and brings them to the cell surface. It immediately calls in the T lymphocytes, trained warriors with all the weapons, gives them these protein molecules and tells them that these are the things that make life difficult. From then on, some of these T cells rush to report to the brain on what is happening, and others go straight to the location of the infection. And so the battle begins. When the battle is over, regulatory T cells come out victorious, saying, "There, we've won. That's enough now. You can leave. Everything is calm." However, sometimes things don't work out this way. For an unknown period of time, regulatory T cells just are nowhere to be found. The battle keeps going on, the bacteria have been destroyed, but these fierce police officers, searching for the victim, continue shooting. So what happens? They begin attacking their own cells, the ones that are not infected and that have nothing to do with this. You might wonder why. Imagine a ranger, a police officer on a serious mission, who has destroyed the enemy but suddenly goes potty and starts thinking that every single passerby could potentially be a future terrorist or something, and starts shooting randomly. These immune cells act in the same way, and there is no one to calm them down. This is the big question in immunology. Why does this happen? Towards the end of the MEDcast, I will tell you why I think this happens. It's difficult to find an answer to this question in a medical textbook. But when we speak about autoimmunity, it can be so varied. It can, for example, be aimed only at your joints, as is the case in arthritis, or one specific organ, as it is with multiple sclerosis. It could also be systemic towards the whole body, attacking all body cells, as is the case with lupus. So, the genesis of autoimmune diseases is very different overall. They are varied, but at the essence, there are always some immune cells that have gone mad. We should also know that when there is such an autoimmune process, there is always a bacterial or viral infection at the root thereof. So, the ignition of the spark is first related to some sort of invasion, later forgotten by the body, that it continues to fight a battle with nobody left as an opponent. It fights itself, as in the game of chess from earlier, where you are pitted against yourself. Why does this happen? Autoimmune diseases always appear in immunity that is too strong. People with weak immunity cannot develop autoimmune diseases. This is the first theory on autoimmune diseases, that of the bored army. Imagine warriors sitting in full gear for hours on end, bored, waiting for something to happen. But time goes by slowly. At one point, in order to have something to do, they start shooting at passers-by, until a big battle finally begins. What I believe is that one could be the bored army, but the second opinion, I think, is more plausible. Notably, that it is not the army that is bored, but the brain. The brain constantly plays games and tries to make them more complicated, in order to keep it interesting. We aren't speaking about conscience here, only the pure game potential in the brain. Every infection, every process, every disease is a game, a challenge for the brain to deal with. Autoimmune diseases are a challenge that I think it creates itself. If I'm standing opposite someone and we start passing a ball, at the beginning we're having a lot of fun. But then we think to ourselves, boring. How about we put up a net? There you go. We put up a net and start passing the ball over it. Then we realize, how about we draw a field for when the ball drops? And there you have it. Tennis, volleyball, how it all builds up. This is thanks to the brain trying to make things difficult. I believe the same applies to autoimmunity. Such challenges appear where the brain guides its army of immune cells, and when there is a win, or at least signals thereof, it thinks, "Ooh, what would happen if we slightly extended this battle?" And it does not put an end to this process. At the same time, however, it is busy with another thing. It's playing several games simultaneously. And at some point, this process keeps simmering, but it forgets about it and goes on to deal with another process. So this is one of the mechanisms of autoimmune diseases arising, and should serve as guidance in how to deal with them and treat them. There are many treatments. All medicine deals with this. I will not dare put myself up for a Nobel Prize by saying how that will happen, but I will briefly present one of the treatments for very severe forms of autoimmune diseases to show you how important the brain is. Bone marrow is taken from a patient with severe autoimmune disease and is frozen. Then, with chemotherapy, they destroy all the immune cells in it, after which they transplant the patient's own bone marrow back. This process is very simply explained in a couple of sentences, but it is an extremely difficult catharsis for these people. They have to protect themselves from infections. They need to be kept in sterile rooms. Their experience is not at all pleasant. But notice that this is one of the treatments of severe forms of autoimmune diseases. You put back the same immune cells to form in the bone marrow, but they will have forgotten about taunting your joints or spine or whatever. Everything is done by the same cells in the same way, so the brain no longer plays this game. This is a piece of evidence that one of the reasons for autoimmune diseases is rather a bored emperor than bored warriors. If you have a strong immunity, do not be too happy, but try to keep it busy with other things. How? Try to fall ill more frequently. I know this sounds absurd coming from a doctor, but if your immunity is strong, try to drive its attention away from what it shouldn't be doing. Furthermore, don't take medication to boost your immunity, especially if you have difficulty getting ill. This could put you at the other end of the spectrum of autoimmune disease. And what should you do if you have an autoimmune disease? I would again recommend you seek other things to keep your immunity busy, so that it could leave what it is currently attacking. Of course, there are different biological treatments for the various aspects which I will not bother you with now. These are the simple things you could do in your everyday lives. Just try to keep the brain and the attention of the immunity away. And in the end, there is often talk about immunotherapy in oncology. I told you about regulatory T cells. They have special sirens or flashlights, if you like. And in one case, they alert before killer lymphocytes press the stop button. In the other, they press the stop button when they have already started doing their job. One of the molecules is called CTLA-4, and the other PDL. This is in fact immunotherapy in oncology. The regulatory T-cell sirens, or flashlights, are blocked, and the killer cells go about everywhere. Most importantly, they go to deal with tumour cells. What we should know is that a side effect of these immunotherapies is wild lymphocytes that start attacking their own cells, and often side effects are notably autoimmune diseases. I have shared an interesting story about immunity with you. I have told you what it is and why it sometimes attacks itself. Let me tell you this. The brain is not destructive. It does not seek self-destruction. Quite the contrary. The brain constantly looks for challenges. And with this, we'll wrap up today's MEDcast. Constantly look for new challenges for your brain to keep things interesting. See you again soon.